Hi, my name is John Carney, and I'm the Product Marketing Manager for ForeScout Extended Modules, otherwise known as the orchestrate piece of our product. And I want to thank you for joining us today to learn more about the ForeScout Extended Modules for vulnerability assessment. So let's take a look at what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to talk about vulnerability management versus vulnerability assessment. Those are two completely different terms, and they're used interchangeably quite a bit, and most of our customers may not understand the difference between the two. We're going to talk about the extended modules for vulnerability assessment, how they work, use cases, and their value propositions. We have a little bit of information on the competitive landscape. We're going to talk about the market opportunity. And finally, we have a couple of success stories that we can share with you. First, let's talk about the ForeScout extended modules. We've broken the extended modules down into the different technologies like vulnerability assessment, advanced threat detection, threat intelligence, endpoint management, and our strategic partners fall into one of those categories or multiple categories, as you can see with the case of Intel Security. Today, we're going to talk about vulnerability assessment partners. We have a new extended module for Rapid7. We have a new extended module for Qualys that was released in Q1 of this year. And we have an updated extended module for Tenable network security. So let me explain what an extended module is first before we go any further for those of you that might not understand it. An extended module is an extension of ForeScout Counteract that allows us in most cases to have bidirectional communication with our partners' products. That's not to be confused with the base modules. The base modules that come with Counteract do have a little bit of interaction with the partner products, but the extended modules go much further, much wider, much deeper. And the other thing to know about the extended modules is that they are no longer sold as bundles like we did in the past. They're now sold as sold and licensed individually, and so you don't have to worry about selling 3 when the customer only wants 1. Now they're available individually and licensed individually. The one thing you may notice is Intel MVM is not on this list. The reason for that is because MVM has been identified as end of life, and we've made the decision not to continue promoting that product because of the end of life. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. So what's vulnerability management? This is a really key concept to understand. Vulnerability management is a risk management best practice. It's a way that has a beginning and end. It's a closed loop. We find something, we fix it. That's the management piece of it. So it's a process, like it says, of finding, analyzing, prioritizing, reporting, and mitigating vulnerabilities. We find something, we fix it. That's the management piece. Now, here's the important part. Vulnerability assessment is a product that supports the VM process. So VA is key to vulnerability management, but the VA product typically is a product that does a periodic scan, looking for security vulnerabilities, and it can be network or host-based, maintains a database of the known vulnerabilities, and can provide reports to the security team that show what those vulnerabilities are. But there are gaps. So VA products typically do periodic scans on the endpoints. So that would be a scheduled scan. It might be daily, it might be weekly, likely not monthly, but the point is that because they do it on a scheduled basis, it's easy for them to miss the transient devices, the mobile workers, the people that aren't always in the office. And that can be a real problem because those transient devices can have scans that are months old. Another gap is that they do provide a snapshot. like I was saying before, they have a reporting mechanism so that they can show the security posture of your network, but it's a point in time. It's a snapshot. And if you think about it, if that scan runs on Friday, come Monday, your security posture could change dramatically. And it's no longer the same, but your report shows you what it was on Friday. And so that can create an issue. So it doesn't really provide real-time information about your threat exposure. And finally, they do provide the vulnerability and risk reports, like I mentioned before. So the reporting capabilities are there so that security teams can understand what their risk posture is, but they're not designed to take risk mitigation. So all they do is tell you how bad the situation is, for instance. And I say that lightly, but it basically is, it shows you where your vulnerabilities are, but that's it. Somebody has to take that information and do something with it, which is part of the vulnerability management process that I explained earlier. But guess what? The good news, ForeScout can help bridge the vulnerability management gap. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can do that. So how do VA modules work, right? Typically, endpoint connects to the network. Counteract detects it. Counteract requests that the VA system do a scan. The VA system reports the results of the scan to Counteract. Counteract takes policy-based actions on that device by either isolating it and taking mitigating actions, or if it's compliant, it'll let it onto the network. Once the mitigation has occurred and that vulnerability has been secured, Counteract can then let it onto the network. So that's really, at a high level, how we look at the VA modules and the interaction with Counteract. But let's take a little closer look. Let's look at the advanced use cases and how we position those. First, we have on-admission vulnerability assessment. Now, this addresses the first gap that we talked about. You remember that slide several slides ago where we talked about the three gaps that the vulnerability management has? The periodic scan endpoint for vulnerabilities was the first one. The on-admission vulnerability assessment is our use case that solves that problem. And if you watch, ForeScout detects an endpoint that connects to the network. It requests the VA system to initiate a real-time scan to the endpoint. The scan results are sent to ForeScout. And this is the type of scan that eliminates the issue of the transient devices, because what this does, one, it gives you real-time insight into your vulnerabilities, and no matter when your mobile workers or transient devices connect to the network, they're scanned immediately. That way, the scans are always up to date, and every time they connect to the network, you know that the vulnerabilities on that particular endpoint have been remediated. Next one's policy-based conditional scan, right? And this goes at the second point that we talked about within the vulnerability management gap, and that's providing a snapshot of your risk posture at a given point in time. So remember I said if it's a periodic scan, it might be daily, might be weekly, but they can get out of date very quickly. So in this use case, ForeScout detects an endpoint connecting to the network. It continuously monitors that endpoint, and the reason for that is that policy-based actions and workflows can be triggered based on the continuous monitoring of that endpoint. So if that endpoint, for instance, is running particular software, or if somebody installs particular software, or there's a change in the configuration, somebody plugs in a USB stick that shouldn't be there, Counteract can ask the VA system to initiate a scan against that device to make sure that it knows the vulnerabilities of that device at that point in time, and it can update that information. So we no longer have outdated information. We can monitor, and when things change, we can rescan and update that information. And finally, we have the automated response. And this talks about the last gap, which is that VA systems aren't designed to take risk mitigation actions. There is no automation built into them. They do the scan, they produce a report, you get the results, and your security team goes running after 5,000 different vulnerability issues so that they can take care of them manually. But this is the use case where we start to talk about automation. So ForeScout detects an endpoint connecting to the network. Sounds familiar, right? They all basically start the same way. ForeScout requests a real-time scan of the endpoint. Scan results go back to ForeScout. This time, ForeScout places the endpoint in a remediation VLAN. You may have heard of it as a quarantine VLAN, but it places it in isolation based on the scan results and the policies that have been created within that environment. Once it's in the quarantine or isolated network, ForeScout can request a patch management system to apply the correct patches. It can request another system to go and remediate a vulnerability, but it can do basically whatever the policy generated asks it to do based on the situation with the endpoint. And once that occurs, then Counteract can allow the endpoint back onto the network. So we limit network access by quarantining it, and we initiate remediation based on the policies and based on the vulnerability that's been identified. Now, this is where we start to get into the automation piece. A lot of our customers are risk adverse to starting to do automated security remediation. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about our extended modules. Our extended modules, as you saw in the first two use cases, have a great deal of value to our customers in both see and control. So, for instance, you can't protect what you can't see, you can't scan what you can't see, and so if an endpoint joins the network, guest or contractor that was not there previously, the VA system isn't going to have any information on it, and so it doesn't know if there's any vulnerabilities there. Counteract can see that, and instead of generating a scan, can send a report to the security manager or the security team that says, somebody just joined the network, this is the IP address, this is the location, and somebody needs to check it out. So there are ways to implement the extended modules that avoid automation, but yet provide a great deal of value to our customers. So what's the value prop, right? The value proposition for our customers really is breaking down the silos. You've heard this over and over again. In a security environment, the different products are usually controlled by different departments, and nobody talks to each other because they don't have time, because they're too busy chasing after the security alerts that those systems are generating. Firewall, ATD, VA, endpoint, right? They're all typically managed by other departments. And ForeScout Counteract breaks down those silos and gets those departments, gets those products talking to each other and working together, and makes them smarter. So by implementing Counteract with an extended module to these different products, everybody gets smarter, and it can reduce the workload on your security team. So if we look at it from more of a kind of holistic perspective, ForeScout provides visibility, compliance and continuous monitoring, so it knows what's on your network at any given point in time. VA does the scanning and maintains the database of the vulnerabilities, of the known vulnerabilities that are on that network. And you put the two together and you eliminate the problem with the transient devices. You get the real-time vulnerability assessment, you get an automated response, but you eliminate all three of the gaps that we talked about earlier, which was the transient devices, the point-in-time risk assessment, and the automated response. So these are three partners that we have today: Rapid7, Qualys, and Tenable. Each one of them has a console, centralized management system that Counteract integrates with through the extended module. So Rapid7 calls it a security console, Qualys calls it a Qualys cloud platform, and Tenable calls it a security center. Now, don't be confused by this. Everybody tries to position their VA product to be a vulnerability management tool. And if you go to any of these websites, you will probably see them call it vulnerability management. The product is a VA product. When you start to wrap it around and the console and everything else, it works its way into the management process, but unless it starts talking to the other systems, it is not a complete vulnerability management system, and that's why understanding the difference between VA and VM is so important. Now, the one difference here is that you may remember the Nessus scanner. The Nessus scanner is a product that Counteract integrates with, and that's been around for a little while. The reason for that is because the Nessus scanner was initially available as a freemium, and so there were a lot of clients out there that would use the freemium version of the Nessus scanner, and so there's a lot of them out there. They may not have Security Center, but Counteract still integrates with the scanner directly. We do not integrate directly with the scanner for Rapid7 or Qualys. Now, the only other difference here is that with Rapid7, we can retrieve non-ForeScout initiated scan results and risk scores. What that means is if Rapid7 does a scan on a schedule, Counteract can extract the results of that scan and pull those into the system so that it can maintain those IOCs that are found in its own database, the vulnerabilities in its own database, rather than having to always go back to the partner's database to look for it. With the other two products, we can only see the results of the scans that ForeScout initiates. So now that we know about the products, we know about the partners, and we understand how this all works together, let's look a little bit at the competitive landscape and how we stack up against Cisco, Aruba, and Bradford. So with Rapid7, Aruba and Bradford have no integration. That's a pretty easy one, right? Cisco ICE, as most of you probably know, is one of the largest competitors that we go up against, and they do have some integrations. So, for instance, with Rapid7, their integration is bidirectional, just like ours is. ICE can trigger a Rapid7 scan. Sounds familiar. ICE can respond to the results from Rapid7, also like Counteract. But here's the difference, and this is this is a really important point to make here, is that it can only respond to endpoints with the AnyConnect agent from Cisco. So remember, ForeScout is agentless. We can do all of that and more without having an agent on the endpoint. Cisco's integration with Rapid7 requires the AnyConnect agent. with Tenable, Bradford, again, no integration. And we have with Aruba listed there no integration, but there is an older integration that Tenable has with Aruba with ClearPass, but it uses an older version of the built-in Nessus scanner. And so it's a little dated, and you probably won't see a lot of it, but you might hear somebody say that, oh yeah, Aruba integrates with Tenable. It's like, well, that's the level of integration that they have. The other is that the integration for Cisco, on the other hand, the integration for Tenable is a little different than ForeScout. The integration is from the Tenable console, not from the ICE console. So we can see information from the ForeScout Counteract console, information from Tenable, but Cisco ICE cannot. ICE can't trigger an on-connect scan. Tenable can get user and device information from ICE that have vulnerabilities, but and Tenable can trigger ICE to quarantine a high-risk IP address. But if you think about it, with Tenable and ICE, you still have two separate products. You still have two separate consoles that you have to look at versus the integration that we have with Tenable, which allows us kind of a single pane of glass, so to speak, so that you can see what's going on with Tenable from within the Counteract console. Qualys, no integration with ICE, no integration with Aruba, no integration with Bradford. The one caveat to that is that Qualys data can be imported into the Firesite Management Center, but that's just a data unload, upload from Qualys to Cisco. So it allows for reporting within Cisco, but it's not really a bidirectional integration. So it's market opportunity. The addressable market size is growing. It's growing at 15.9%. You can see from 2014 to 2019, it is just keeps going up. A little lull, 2015, 2016, but from here up, it's going to continue to grow because the vulnerabilities, the bad guys that are writing these are getting smarter and more persistent. And the vulnerabilities that they're creating are becoming very targeted. And so the ability to be able to catch these right away is going to get even more important as the number of endpoints on the network grow. Market share. So the VA market share by vendor, right? So Qualys has about 13% of the market. Rapid7 at the moment has 12% of the market, but they're growing they're growing faster than the other two. And the reason they're growing faster than the other two is because with the end of life of Intel NVM, they are recommending Rapid7 as the replacement. Tenable has 9%. Tenable is very big in the federal space, but they're starting to gain traction in the corporate world. You can see on the left there the percentage of growth over the last year or so of each of the products. You're going to see Rapid7 going up very quickly. You're going to see Intel Security going down very quickly. Success stories. So what have we done? So here's a list of extended module customers, and these were all sales in Q1 of 2016. Now, I need to remind you here that these customer names cannot be shared outside of ForeScout unless we have specific written permission from them. So you need to be careful when you're talking with prospective customers about this. If you have any questions, there's contact information at the end of this presentation that you can use to find out which names you can use and which ones you can't. Here's a rather large one, 543,000, Hackensack University Medical Center, right? So it resulted in a SDR call, getting the first meeting, right? The main use case was visibility and HIPAA compliance. And why did we win? So first of all, we had the right approach. It was thoughtful and targeted. It was addressing the business needs, HIPAA compliance, and it was providing additional visibility. We had the right technology because during the proof of concept, they found devices that their IT group didn't have their endpoint management installed on. It's not unusual to plug in a counteract device. We've had customers see 40% more devices on their network than they knew they had within a day after they turn it on. So proof of concept provides a lot of information and will make the point to the customer very quickly. Now, typically, well, lessons learned, typically you would go in with a NAC product and talk to the network team. Well, the network team doesn't have the money anymore. What you're seeing is that the money is rolling up to the business owners and to the CXOs who have to make the final decision. So the lesson learned here was get to the CIO. They need to understand the value prop of the product, but it's good to have a champion in the account. So if you've got somebody from the network or security team that believes in you, that believes in the product, that understands the value here, having them at your side when you're talking with the CIO is going to help a great deal. So a couple of the success stories, Health First, Hackensack, right? We went in for NAC projects and the project scope extended when we started talking orchestration. Structured the meeting, talk about visibility and NAC. During the orchestration conversation, they asked which tools they had in place. They mentioned Rapid7 and Qualys. We happened to have integrations with them, walked them through how we can help solve those gaps that we discussed earlier, and that got their attention. But kind of the bottom line is always find out what the customer has in place in terms of vulnerability assessment. And in this case, it's vulnerability assessment, but really when you're talking with this customer, prospective customer, it's what do they have, what other security tools do they have in place that cover their vulnerability assessment, to cover their ATD, endpoint, SIM, everything. Because knowing what they have, and as you start to understand the rest of the extended modules, that will allow for a better conversation with the customer to show greater value with the extended modules. So we talked about this a little bit already. The target market is the install base. All three partners target the Global 2000 and the federal government, as do we. So go back, look at the install base. If we don't have an extended module in there, figure out what vulnerability assessment tool they're using, and go have a conversation with them about it. The new customers, we should position the extended modules as best in class with ForeScout, right? But the VA partners as technology leaders in the marketplace. And it doesn't matter which partner, they're all technology leaders, right? As I mentioned on the last slide, the influencer buyer is going to be the CXO or the ISO, but the buyer and the champion that you probably want is going to be the network security manager, the security architect, because they're the ones that are going to understand the impact and the value of the integration. And look for customers that have McAfee MVM. With the MVM product going end of life, it's going to need to be replaced, and it's going to be replaced with something, whether it's Rapid7 or another one, it's going to be replaced with something, and very likely we will have an integration with that product. And then leverage the success story and highlight the better together message, because that's what it's all about. So there's a bunch of demand gen tools out there for you. We have the solution brief. We have data sheets on all three integrations. There's a training presentation. This one that you're on today. There's a customer presentation for VA, and there is a general presentation for the vulnerability assessment technology that also contains slides specific to the 3 partners that we have integrations with. There's email, call guide, case studies, so all the typical information that is out there to help you sell this. So kind of wrapping up here, first of all, you need to sell the vision of orchestration. Orchestration really is the value that the extended modules bring to the table. I mentioned before, not everybody is going to be interested in the orchestration and the automation piece of it, but that's today. That may not be where they're at tomorrow. They don't have to implement it right away. They can come in, they can implement an extended module that helps them do the job better, and then when they're comfortable, move into the automation piece of it. Drive the attach rate. What we want to do is try and figure out where the partners are. So which VA products does the customer have? And get in to those partners that may not have ForeScout at the moment and explain to them added based on that. From the install base, talked about this a little bit earlier, I mentioned it earlier, the current installation base where we don't have extended modules, go back, start talking to them, start talking to your customers about what they're using for VA, what are they using for ATD, what are they using for endpoint protection, figure out what they got, look and see if we have an extended module for it, and then you can start to have that conversation. Finally, leverage the strategic partners. So Qualys, Tenable, Rapid7. It's a good time to get to know your counterpart with those companies in your territory. When they go in to try to sell their product, they should be bringing, it would be nice if they brought you in behind them. And by the same token, you know, if you're talking to a customer that's looking at one of these 3, you should be pulling them in behind it. Better together, right? Two's better than one. Let's talk about the integration of it right out of the gate and make an impression on a customer. If you need help, ForeScout Alliance contact is Marty Davis. His information is there. From marketing, that's me, John Carney, and my contact information is there. And then at the bottom, you'll see 3 email addresses, Rapid7, Qualys, and Tenable at ForeScout.com. Those aren't live just yet at the time of this recording, but they're being set up and will be available so that if you have questions, you'll be able to send it to Rapid7 or Qualys, and they'll get to the right people. As we start to add people and people shift around, we want to make sure that you have a consistent way to get help, and that's how we're going to handle that. And then we've got a recording of the webcast, and there's going to be a Sales University course on the VA technology. That's all I have today. Thanks for sticking with me. Appreciate you listening. Hope it was a help. I wish you all good luck, good health, and good selling. Have a great day.